the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
And now for the latest news on the passing of Pope Francis, we go to our Rome correspondent, Ashley Noronha, from the Eternal City. Good morning, Ashley. Thanks so much for joining us on this somber morning from Rome.
Good morning to you, John. I am here right now at St. Peter's Square as thousands of people swarm around. Some have heard the news and some have not, but this is quite a day in Rome, as you can imagine.
Can you give us a sense of the mood there in the Piazza San Pietro and St. Peter's Square? I'm sure people, obviously, Rome time, have had so much more time than here in the Americas to react to somewhat of the shocking passing of the Holy Father when you consider what a beautiful day it was there in that very same St. Peter's Square yesterday on Easter Sunday.
John, right now, St. Peter's Square is filled with flowers. They have the beautiful Easter flowers, the tulips that traditionally are brought from the Netherlands every year to decorate the steps of St. Peter's Basilica. And so that sense of joy is here. But here, just a day later, on Easter Monday, of course, we get the news this morning that the Pope is no more. And there is a sense of shock here in the piazza. I interviewed a woman today from Lebanon. And she said, but I just saw him yesterday. I was here in the square, and she said, and he drove right past us. Of course, she was referring to the fact that he indeed got into that open-air vehicle, that open-air Jeep, and drove through St. Peter's Square with all of the worshipers who'd come to be part of the Easter Sunday Mass, cheering and saying things like, Viva el Papa, long live the Pope. And in fact, she even showed me a video of him passing right by her. And yes, indeed, the Pope yesterday looked exhausted. We could hear it in his voice. The few words that he said. Of course, he said, brothers and sisters, happy Easter, buona Pasqua. But even that, you could tell, was very labored. And he had a hard time, of course, getting in and out of that vehicle as well because of his weakness. But then again, nobody expected that news that came this morning. And as I mentioned, many people here in the square, most of the people here are here as tourists. But there are some people, for example, in the center of the square right now. I spoke to a priest who is just standing there alone with his rosary, facing St. Peter's Basilica and praying. There's another Franciscan priest on his knees praying as well. So this is the scene that I'm seeing around me, John.
Ashley, what was your reaction when you learned that the Holy Father had passed away? I myself was shocked when my wife literally poked me and woke me up to tell me, wake up, the Holy Father has passed away.
Yeah, because we had been hearing again and again from the doctors that he was getting better. We were hearing from the press office of the Holy See, getting positive messages that his vitals were good, that he continued to progress in an upward fashion of healing. And so, on the other hand, during this entire time, those 5 weeks that he was in the hospital, et cetera, we certainly have all been praying not only for him from a physical perspective, but also for his soul in preparation for whatever may come and when that day may come, which we knew would come eventually. So certainly in that sense, with all of the different prayer, the rosaries that have been held here in St. Peter's Square, as well as the different prayer sessions that have been held throughout the world, we do know that he is accompanied by many, many prayers today as he passes into immortality.
Well, the Holy Father obviously got to say goodbye in providential fashion to the tens of thousands of pilgrims yesterday in St. Peter's Square that loved him. But he also got a chance to briefly meet with Vice President J.D. Vance, along with his wife and their children, for a brief meeting. And J.D. Vance found out this morning, and he wrote, I just learned of the passing of Pope Francis. My heart goes out to the millions of Christians all over the world who loved him. I was happy to see him yesterday, though he was obviously very ill, but I'll always remember him for the homily he gave in his very early days.
Well, yes. In fact, yesterday morning around 11:30 a.m., there at Casa Santa Marta, which is where the Pope lived, Vice President J.D. Vance met with Pope Francis. And they had a brief meeting. They exchanged Easter greetings and pleasantries. And in fact, the Pope had some special gifts for Vice President Vance. He gave him his very own Vatican tie. He gave him a special red rosary. And then he also had rosaries, white rosaries for the Vance children and a white rosary for Mrs. Vance as well. And then gave the kids the gift of 3 large chocolate Easter eggs as well. And then the day before, Vice President Vance met with Secretary of State Cardinal Parolin, and they discussed typical topics that you see in these types of meetings. They discussed international relations. They talked about religious freedom, and they talked about various humanitarian concerns. And so I'm sure it was quite a shock as well to our vice president when he woke up to the news.
Ashley, as a Catholic journalist, and you've been covering the Holy Father Pope Francis for a long, long time, what has it been like for you to report on the papacy of Pope Francis from day one?
Yes. Well, it's interesting because when I first came to Rome, I reported on Pope Benedict XVI, and so then was able to really experience a shift because every pope has its own tone, has his own personality, and so certainly felt that change. And Pope Francis, we've seen, has certainly throughout his pontificate emphasized the importance of action, the importance of doing things and going out and meeting people, sharing the good news with people. I think with that, he leaves a great witness of the importance of living the corporal works of mercy, John.
No doubt about it. In fact, some even have referred to him as the Pope of Mercy, even though the upcoming Feast of Divine Mercy was actually instituted by Pope St. John Paul II. He has continued that same spirit of JP2.
Yes, indeed. And of course, I'm thinking about the reality of Pope John Paul II's death and Divine Mercy Sunday, and now we have Pope Francis' death on what we call Pasquetta, which is Little Easter, the day after Easter. And so both of these coming in the time of Easter joy. And also it's quite interesting because today is also the birthday of Rome. So we celebrate the birth of Rome and we celebrate the death and the life of Pope Francis.
There are so many aspects of the life of Pope Francis that we will be talking about in the upcoming days. One that really stands out, and we've talked about it here on the show, is the special devotion that he had to the Blessed Mother, always visiting that beautiful icon at St. Mary Major before any apostolic trip, before and after. Can you share briefly about this Marian Pope, Pope Francis?
Yes, that icon is so important to the people of Rome because it was that very icon that Pope Gregory the Great was carrying in praying for the end of the plague, and indeed those prayers were answered. This is considered to be a miraculous icon, and Pope Francis, who had that special love not only, of course, for that icon, but also the church that you mentioned, John, one of the major basilicas, the Church of St. Mary Major, which was one of his most frequented church, but also the one that he has chosen to be his final resting place. So this means that he will be the first pope in a century to be interred outside of the Vatican. And although more than 100 popes have been buried in the crypts beneath St. Peter's Basilica, this will be a little bit of a change from what we've been used to in the last 100 years. Although we're expecting that the funeral itself is going to take place in St. Peter's Square. And right there in St. Peter's Square, there is a beautiful icon of Our Lady as well, John. This is the icon of Our Lady of the Mother of the Church. And she looks down with her loving maternal eyes on all of the people who have gathered here. And, of course, all of the different popes who have led the church, and as well as the cardinals, in her loving maternal way, continues to guide the church.
Final moments. How do you think history will remember Pope Francis? What will be his legacy?
Well, John, it was almost like clockwork that we could expect that in most all of Pope Francis' public addresses and writings, he was always asking the world to pray for peace. So I think that this intention of prayers for peace will certainly be associated with the legacy of Pope Francis.
Well, there is so much more that we will be talking about in the upcoming days when it comes to Pope Francis and his pontificate, and really appreciate you being with us, Ashley, to bring us a sense of what it's like there in Rome, in St. Peter's Square this morning. Thank you so much.
Many blessings. Glad to be with you from St. Peter's Square today, John.